Stop solving other people's problems before you solve your own. This is a chronic illness and a plague that plagues many people. In particular, people pleasers, people who have potentially been in codependent relationships, trying to solve other people's problems, trying to fix the dynamic, trying to put a band-aid on the root cause of the problem, or put a band-aid on a cut off leg, essentially. The band-aid does not work. So you need to stop solving other people's problems before you solve your own. It's like the saying, filling other people's cups when you don't even have a full cup. You must fill your own cup first, and that overflow can then be used to help fill other people's cups. Because that's overflow you don't need. That's overflow that you want to give away. That's overflow that you give without expectation of receiving. That's overflow that is in a state of presence and love. As a child, maybe somebody goes through a traumatic event or has a dynamic in which it is not a peaceful dynamic and everything is haywire, and maybe there's a conditional state of love placed upon them, whereas if they do not do something, they do not receive the love that they deserve. So we try to solve things. We try to fix the problem. We try to make the dynamic okay. But in that state of doing and solving, you're only creating resentment for that other person and that dynamic. You're solving when you haven't even solved for yourself. And what happens is when you in your mind solve the situation for the other person, or when you haven't solved your own or filled your own cup up, what happens is you think you've solved the situation, and then there's that expectation in your mind. You're moving forward. Well, I solved your situation. Well, I helped you out. And what happens is that dynamic, you realize that that action and solution in particular didn't really solve the root cause. And then what will happen is there's resistance and strain on this relationship because there was a lack of trust. Rightfully so. You had a lack of trust because there was no trust in the past, or maybe there still isn't. And you solve, and there's this expectation that they're going to heal, that they're going to be fixed. But you realize that somebody can only solve their own problems. And if you keep masking the problem and solving with band-aids, it may provide temporary relief. But what happens is they fall back into the same cycle because they haven't fixed it for themselves and they've been enabled. And then there's that resentment again. And you're here left with an empty cup, solving everybody's problems, and the problems continue. So the hardest thing you can do is solve your own problems. And that's a scary thing to say because you're so good at solving other people's problems. But in that dynamic of you solving other people's problems, you've become a victim. You've become accustomed to blaming other people. Rightfully so. As a child, or maybe even now, you potentially are a victim of your dynamic. And you potentially were or brought this trauma on through the lack of other people. So there is that resentment. But if you continue to empty your own cup, you're going to continue to create cycles of resentment, and they're not going to heal on their own. So the best piece of advice that I have is, as hard as it is, recognize that you are not a victim. You have the choice to do anything that you need to do to create a healthy dynamic. And certainly, if you're dependent on other people, if it's a family dynamic where your parents are creating this trauma, maybe it's going to be hard to move out completely, but maybe you do your best to create space, because what you want to do is, by all means necessary, create a dynamic where you can uphold the love that you innately have for that person or those people. How, though? Does that mean you need to have space? Does that mean you need to have strict boundaries? For me in my life, this has been a journey that's taken upwards of a decade of strategically creating these boundaries and dynamics where I'm in a state of peace and I can hold and create a state of love and presence and happiness around certain people. Because in the past I've continued to solve, and that's created resentment. I realize I'm sitting here solving all these problems and it didn't solve anything. It solved things on the surface and I learned a bunch and became the person who I'm supposed to become. So your journey may be to go through that, solving other people's journeys, then realizing you need to solve yours. You need to figure out your own problems. And what happens is you will have solved your problems, you'll have a dynamic, and you'll be able to see the people you love in a state of love, so having those boundaries and having the dynamic that makes you feel comfortable, and you move forward with that. And then you're able to serve these people with love, with boundaries. You're able to not serve them in a frantic way where you're overflowing or where you are diminishing your cup unnecessarily. And this is extremely hard and we've all been through trauma. Everybody's trauma is subjective in the sense of how it feels for them. So use that trauma with love and recognize it's your greatest asset, because it's going to make you create the strategic changes necessary to create your dreams and give you the edge to relate and share things with people. Instead of being a victim and falling back into fear, desperation, and lack, just recognize that every trigger that you're facing is your greatest lesson, Every trigger, every moment of resistance, and it's all okay. In the grand scheme of things, this is just a very short period of time in your life, and you're going to learn many lessons from it. But certainly, the overarching lesson is that you will not get anywhere continuously pleasing and continuously solving others' problems while neglecting your own. When you're solving problems in a state of lack, desperation, and when you have a cup of water that is not filled and you're pouring no water or very minimal amounts of water into other people's cups out of fear. You're trying to fix out of fear. So you need to, it's not what you do or how you do it. It's not that you can't solve other people's problems, but it's not what you do. It's how you do it. That's what I meant to say. It's how you do it. It's doing things in a state of love, being around these people in a state of love, solving other people's problems in a state of love. When you've solved your own, when you've created your own boundaries, when you've optimized your own life, when you've created freedom in your own life, you can solve, you can give without expectation of receiving. Because if you have any expectation of receiving, you will be let down and you will be brought back to a place of fear and lack. But if you give without expectation of receiving, then you'll open yourself up to new levels of love, new levels of opportunities, because you're going to enjoy doing these things. You're going to be in a state of flow, helping and solving and giving. So do not diminish yourself. Do not recognize or do not forget your own internal power. And that happens a lot on a people-pleasing journey out of fear and a lack-based relationship, where you might innately believe that you're not good enough, but it's simply a program that you've adopted out of being manipulated by a false set of notion, or of being manipulated by a false fear-based reality. And you don't need to continue to believe that lie. It is a complete lie. So you do whatever you need to do to create freedom in your own life, to solve your own problems. And the people who truly love you unconditionally will support you no matter what you do. And even if these people that are placing these conditional states on you, I'm sure they truly do love you unconditionally, but they're reacting and creating based on their own 3D reality of fear-based thought patterns. So the boss level, the final boss level, is acting noble and creating change with love, even in the face of adversity and fear. And if you can get to that place, your life will continue to transform. And it's not a place that is hard to get to. It's hard because of the stories we place upon this state of being. But in reality, this place is accessible to you when you accept this moment, when you let go of the fear, when you let go of any judgment, and when you forget about the future. When you're in the moment, this moment fully, you can be that of who you want to become. Guys, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing. We're going to continue to share wisdom, share my journey, take risk, and build freedom in our lives. Thank you, fam. Peace.